everybody. We are so happy to be here. So we are going to represent the talk Trapped in the Net, Advanced Phishing and Evasion. And before we start the talk, we want to do a little background information of ourselves. So my name is Igal Lytzki.
I'm Serussi.
And we are security researchers at Microsoft, doing research and response on email, messaging, and web detection engineering. Previously, we worked at a startup company called Perception Point, which there we led the response group responsible for malware, BC, and phishing campaigns on the email landscape.
All right, so I want to start with a short introduction. In the past 4 or 5 years, we are seeing more and more people switching to hybrid position. COVID has changed something, and people are working from home. So this situation is becoming very concerning for organizations that try to protect their end users because email had become one of our main channels for communication, and a research conducted last year found out that over 90% of all cybersecurity attacks last year started with an email, whether it was credential phishing, credit card phishing, fraud, or some kind of business email compromise attack. Now, phishing has been with us for over 30 years now, and this is one of the first phishing kits that was introduced where attackers actually impersonated AOL employees and tried to phish for credential and credit cards. Now, those days we are in the 2020s, and we are living in the generative AI ages, where you can simply talk to tools like FraudGPT, WormGPT, ask them for prompts, and they will guide you how to launch the attack, how to build an SMTP server, how to send the email, and how to lure the right victims.
So yeah, the agenda for today will include some phishing trends from the past year. We will talk about some post-account takeover tactics, why phishing still works these days, and we will finish up with some key takeaways that each one of you can take back home and implement in your own organization.
Now, before we start, I just want to mention that all the evasion techniques that you are about to see here were investigated by our team over the past months, and they still take place right now as we speak. So starting up with bypassing static text filters. We all know those phishing templates where they impersonate Microsoft, right? In this case, it was impersonating a two-factor authentication request. We can see the Microsoft logo, and we can see the view request button. Now, for the human eye, it actually looks like it is written Microsoft. It looks like the subject is saying mobile device two-factor authentication. But if we'll just copy and paste the subject to the command line, we'll be able to see suspicious characters between the different letters, and those are invisible Unicode characters. What attackers are doing, they are embedding those invisible Unicodes between the subjects, display names, URL text, and the email text itself, and this way they manage to bypass the filters looking for words like Microsoft, looking for words like password, and the security filter will just not be able to incriminate them as impersonation attempts. Now, if we'll just copy and paste the view request to a Unicode identifier, we'll be able to see all the Latin capital letters like the V, the I, the E, and between them we'll be able to see the Unicodes, like different hyphens, different dashes, and actually we found out 7 main different Unicodes that are used in phishing attempts, like byte order mark, soft hyphen, right marks, and some non-breaking spaces. Another way to bypass those static text filters is actually by using clickable images. So we can see some examples of impersonation attempt to DocuSign, to Adobe, and sometimes you're not sure how your email security solution managed to miss those, and those are actually false negative. But in fact, those, for the human eye, it looks like it's really saying DocuSign, it looks like it's written review document. But if we'll just over the email template, we'll be able to see that there is no text at all, and those are actually clickable images. So in order to stop those, your email security solution has to be equipped with OCR technologies, and those are kind of expensive. You can't really run OCR on everything, because as a security vendor, you have to be profitable. So you have to make sure what you are going to scan, what you are going to detonate inside of the sandbox, and make smart decisions. Now, moving on from static email evasions to static URL evasions, we are seeing the abusals of open redirectors. In order to understand what is an open redirector, we have to understand 2 things. First one is how a URL is structured, and the second one, what is a redirector. So a URL structure is built of 5 parts. We have the protocol, the domain, the query parameters, the path, and the fragment. Now, query parameters are often used as redirectors, and a redirector is basically every URL that you are browsing into and gives you a status code of 300 and redirects you to a different domain or a different web page. Now, what attackers are doing, they are using those query parameters, which are commonly used like redirect equal, URL equal, and link equal, and after that, they just inject the malicious payload. Now, what they are doing by that, they are abusing legitimate services and services that we trust, like high-tech companies, telecom companies, governments, and use their domains in order to redirect you to the attacker's domain. And let's take an example. Impersonation attempt to Office 365. We all know these phishing templates. If we'll just over the button over here, we'll be able to see one of the biggest newsletters domains followed by a query parameter of URL equal. After that, we have the attacker side. Now, the user is going to click on this button and gets redirected automatically to the landing page. Another interesting point here is that we have the fragment part. And what the attackers are doing, they just extract the fragment. And from the fragment, they take the victim address, inject it into the login, and takes the domain. In this case, it was Microsoft.com. They take the logo of Microsoft and embed it inside of the login page at the top. So why is it interesting? Because this way, while they abuse the legitimate service, they manage to bypass two things. The first one is actually the allow list. We trust services like newsletters. We trust our governments. So sometimes they're not configuring things in an appropriate way, and those attackers manage to find those vulnerabilities and use them. Another thing is actually bypassing the reputation filters. As I mentioned before, security filters, they have to be profitable, so they make smart decisions what they are going to scan and what they are not going to scan, which services are trusted. So in order to save those, it's very easy and very simple. You just have to make safe configuration on your side, make sure you are doing some allow list, and making sure that you are not allowing any attacker to use your own URL domain and bypass it and pass it a different website or a different domain that is not trusted. So make sure you're only trusting the services that are right for you, and you're not allowing the attacker to use your own domain to redirect to its own website.
So moving on to a different attack vector that actually started in the past year. Attackers started to leverage QR codes in emails to actually take or maybe force the victim to take out his cell phone, which probably doesn't have some organization policies or any kind of detection, and actually scan the QR code. So the initial vector that we saw back in mid-2023 is a QR code embedded in the email body. You can see two examples right below here. So you can see two examples that actually had QR code embedded in the email body, and the email itself tries to impersonate a known company. And then the victim takes out his cell phone, scans the QR code, and being redirected to a phishing login page. Okay? After conducting a data study, we found out that in today's reality, nowadays, we see QR phishing campaigns taking part of 5% of the whole phishing landscape, which, if we translate this, attackers are actually sees a great success with infecting via QR phishing campaigns. So since then, actually, different threat actors try to manipulate and use different file types to embed those QR codes in them. So some files that we saw with QR code in them are PDF, Word documents, HTML files, and in some cases, threat actors actually try to invert or flip the color of the QR codes in order to mess up with some QR extraction libraries. Moving on to a different kind of technique. So geo-evasion or geofencing is a technique that's known in malwares and stuff alike, where we want to detonate in certain countries, but this is something that also being seen in phishing campaigns, especially in the past year. The most targeted region that we see with geofencing applied is Latin America. So as you can see below, there is a diagram that's showcasing the most basic flow. So usually the phishing email will have a certain URL maybe embedded in the email body or maybe in one of its attachments. Then the user will be redirected to one of the attacker's websites, which there a geo-check will occur, which checks the geolocation and maybe some other parameters being passed during the network activity. In case that the victim is actually passing the check, he will be redirected to the malicious site, which probably will download a certain payload on the victim's computer. And if not, he will be redirected to a benign site such as google.com or bing.com. So here we have actually an example. The first example will showcase what happens if we browse from non-targeted country. So we try to browse to the URL, and then we are redirected to google.com. But taking the same URL and browsing from the targeted country, we actually being redirected to a malicious site, and a payload is downloaded on our computer. So this is something interesting that we want to share with you. During one of our investigations, we managed to fetch the phishing kit source code. So this is a full PHP code on server side, which at the top, as you can see, contains an IP-based array that has a bunch of subnets. Below that, you can see a host-based array that contains different security vendors' host names, and also some government entities. And on the bottom, you can see a simple if condition that checks if the IP or the hostname is presented in one of the arrays. If it is, the user will be presented with a blank page, meaning he got geofenced. And if not, he will be redirected to the malicious website. And as we saw before, a malicious payload will be downloaded on his computer.
Now, another technique to actually block the security vendor from reaching out to the landing page is by using CAPTCHAs. And CAPTCHAs actually stand for completely automated public tests to tell computers and humans apart, and they have been with us for over 20 years now. The original purpose of CAPTCHAs was good, blocking the attackers from DDoSing your website, from entering some parameters inside of the forms, and basically just blocking the attackers from doing bad things to your websites. Now, there are a few types of CAPTCHAs. We have the image-based one, the text-based, the audio-based, and the action-based CAPTCHAs. And right now, attackers are using those CAPTCHAs to block the security vendors from reaching the landing page and incriminating the phishing site. So what we started seeing is attackers are using CAPTCHAs like the text-based ones, and actually those are kind of easy to bypass because today we have OCR technologies. You can identify the text, input the text in the text box, and then click on submit and continue and proceed to the fake login and incriminate it. So when attackers understood that, they moved on to the usage of the legitimate CAPTCHAs as we know them, the reCAPTCHA and the HCAPTCHA, which are using the images-based CAPTCHAs. So of course, security vendors, they can't bypass those CAPTCHA, but building with some signals from the emails, like the reputation of the sender, the reputation of the URL, how the email actually looks like, we are able to determine whether the URL is malicious or not. So attackers understood that as well, and what they did, they moved on to a different CAPTCHA, which actually is the Cloudflare turnstile CAPTCHA that checks for navigator.webdriver. And this navigator.webdriver can indicate one of three, whether you are an automation tool, remote debugging port, or browsing with an headless browsing mode. And if you're matching any of those three, you are probably a security vendor that tries to get to the final payload, and what they are going to do, they are just going to throw the CAPTCHA in your face and block you from accessing the final payload. So we managed to incriminate those as well. We built new detection. And this is where we started seeing custom-made CAPTCHAs with embedded Microsoft logos. Sometimes it comes with branded DocuSign or Adobe. And of course, we have the 100% custom CAPTCHA like the ones you see on the right. Microsoft logo with I'm not a robot with a checkbox and a submit button. Now, the challenge in the industry right now is the CAPTCHAs that a user has to actually read the instructions and understand how to play with the website. Sometimes you have to drag a button around. Sometimes you have to press and hold for 5 seconds. And this is a real challenge for the security vendors that try to understand how to proceed and get to the landing page. And this is what we are facing with right now. So it's always a cat and a mouse game. And this makes us wonder what's going to come next, because we are always deploying new detections. We build new engines, and then the attackers find new ways to bypass those filters. Now, another way of user interaction evasion is actually called click required, also known as a two-step phishing. The user is going to receive an email saying that your password has expired, please click here to reset the password, or click here to view the document. Now the user is going to click on the URL and gets redirected to an hosting site, which is usually going to include a logo of eFax, DocuSign, Adobe, Microsoft, with some suspicious request to click on a button, like click here to view the document. Now, the reason it is called a click-required phish is because the user has to actually make another click, another step, in order to get redirected to the phishing page. Now, for you, for the human eyes, it looks kind of simple, right? Everybody knows that this is phishing. But for vendors, how can you know which URLs you have to click? How do you decide? Because we can't just click on everything because we have to be profitable, and every click that we are making actually costs us money. So we have to make smart decisions, and sometimes we have the one-time links. So we have to make sure we are not also clicking on one-time links like unsubscribe and reset password. So this is very challenging. And what attackers are doing is, once we're clicking on this the view document button, they are going to redirect us to AITM website that actually is going to impersonate a Microsoft login. As we can see, the domain is not related to Microsoft, and basically the user is going to input his credentials, which are going to get sent to the attacker. Now, the uniqueness of this one is that all the first step of the hosting services are actually legitimate hosting services, like website builders, file sharing services, presentation services, and sign-in platforms. And this is only a small portion of the list, and you know those platforms, you trust them. And as I showed before, what the attackers are doing, they're just going to embed a URL inside of it or an HTML file, which once clicked, you are going to get redirected to the AITM attack. Now, Igal, can you please tell the audience what is AITM and how it works?
Thanks, Dean. So yeah, AITM stands for Adversary in the Middle. Initially brought to us by Kuba Gretzky back in 2018. He published an online tool on GitHub called Evasion 3.0, which demonstrates a 2FA bypass plus a session cookie theft, okay? Which leads us to nowadays reality that we have different threat groups actually taking those capabilities and selling a phishing kits, okay? So this raises a question that what actually attacker needs those days to conduct a successful phishing campaign. So we can take only like 3 things. The first one is money, because if you can't build a phishing kit on your own, you will need to buy this. The second one is the basic understanding, because you need to know how email works, okay? And maybe you will also need to understand and learn how to host those phishing kits on your website. And the third one is a distribution list, because eventually you need to send it somewhere. So now let's understand how it works, okay? So we have Bob. Bob started his day at work, opens up his mailbox, and he sees an email telling him that his mailbox is full and he needs to empty it. So Bob clicks on the URL, and now he's redirected to the attacker website. At the same moment, the attacker website will actually proxy a request to the target website requesting for a login page or maybe an MFA prompt, which then the target website will respond back to the attacker website. And the attacker website will take the response and mimic it back to Bob. Bob will need to insert his credentials or maybe the MFA key, which then the attacker website will take and send it over to the target website. And upon a valid login, a session cookie will be returned from the target website, and the attacker website will actually take this cookie and sniff it, and at the same time will actually redirect Bob to a different page, leaving the attacker with a valid session cookie on the name of Bob. Okay, so let's talk about the phishing loop, okay? What happens when an attacker actually manages to get credentials upon credentials? So we have the hacker. He's crafting his phishing campaign and sending it over to his distribution list. One of the victims in the distribution list opens up the phishing, clicks on the URL, and inserts his credentials. At this moment, the attacker now has valid credentials for the victim. He will then log into the victim's mailbox. If the hacker is smart enough, he will configure some rules which we will talk about in the next slide. And then he will conduct a phishing campaign with the victim's mailbox, but this time he will send it over to known contacts of the victim, meaning that the percentages that those contacts will open up those emails based on trust relations will be much more higher. And now the hacker actually receives new and valid credentials for a bunch of other mailboxes, and as you can see, it actually creates a loop of attacker logging into a compromised mailbox, conducting a new phishing, and gains new credentials. So, as I said before, we're going to talk about inbox rules, but before that, let's talk about compromised mailbox indicators. So the first thing that we actually can look when we try to see something suspicious in a mailbox is things related to login events. So we want to look for combination of such stuff. Okay, there's 6 parameters, but probably there are some more. If we take combination, for example, of 2 of them, let's say location and work hours, if we know that the employee usually works from 9 to 5, and his primary location is based in the US, and then out of nowhere, we see a login occurring at midnight coming from Thailand, probably something suspicious that worth to look at. And the second thing is inbox rule. So inbox rules actually helps us in our workdays to actually keep our mailbox clean and organized, but attackers can take this to their own advantage to keep themselves stealthy and lurk down in the compromised mailbox. So 2 examples of such mailbox rules that can be a little bit suspicious. The first one is hiding out the messages on the left. So the inbox rule name is a bunch of dots, okay? The condition is looking at the subjects for keywords related to phishing or maybe for something that related to bounce back messages. And the action will actually move those emails to the RSS feeds folder and mark those emails as read. If we translate this, basically, attacker wants to make sure that before conducting a phishing email with the compromised mailbox, he doesn't want that any unreachable contacts or maybe some security vendor that stands between him and the target will somehow bounce back an email telling the compromised mailbox that, hey, you have something suspicious going on in your mailbox. And the second one is forwarding financial information. So this one is a bit tricky because the only condition here is looking at the subject or in the body of the email for financial-related keywords such as invoice, receipt, bank, and the action being taken is actually forwarding it to external mailbox. So from here, the attackers can actually take the forwarded email, build a domain lookalike domain, and impersonate the company, and then actually use it for a BC phishing campaign or maybe a trade hijack campaign. So we want also to talk about nation-state threats, actors. So we all know that usually those threats are using some kind of 0 days or exploits or have a sophisticated kill chain. But there is some threat actors that actually using phishing as part of their attacking vector. So today we are going to talk about Mango Sandstorm, also known as Muddy Water or TA450. Their origin is based in Iran, targeting mostly Middle East countries, and their favorite sectors are telecom, local governments, and airlines. And a typical phishing campaign coming from Mango Sandstorm will look something like this. The Mango Sandstorm operator will access a compromised mailbox, okay, maybe from a previous phishing campaign or by other methods. He will then craft a phishing campaign using the compromised mailbox and send it over to known contacts of this mailbox. Usually those kinds of emails will include a URL embedded in the email, and this will redirect to a hosting site with a zip hosted on the hosting site. When downloading the zip, there will be installer for RMM tool, such as a Terra agent or maybe Screen Connect. And when this kind of RMM tool is detonated, the Mango Sandstorm operator has a full access to the target machine. So here we want to showcase also two examples of recent campaigns. The first one is targeting the Israeli audience. As we can see, the content of the email is in Hebrew, the link at the bottom, and then a redirection to a hosting site, a zip also written in Hebrew, which then downloads, which when downloaded, executes an RMM tool. And a second example targeting a different country, but as we can see, has the same TTPs of URL embedded in the email, hosting site, and a zip hosted on the hosting site.
Now, another way that attackers can actually manipulate us and use compromised user to start with an email and then get out of email is a campaign that is targeting the hospitality organization, basically the hotel industry. So this is a campaign that impersonates Booking.com, but we are also seeing it for Airbnb, we're seeing it for Expedia and for Agoda. And what attackers are doing, they are impersonating services like Booking.com, Expedia, and all the others that I mentioned, and they are going to lure the hotel representative saying that they have to insert the credential. So we have two ways to do it. The first one is actually by impersonating those services, as you can see here, and the second one is by impersonating a future or past guest of the hotel, building trust within the threats. This can also go to the category of business email compromise, and after building trust, they are going to send a link. Now, the URL text is going to look like it's going to take you to Booking.com, but if we are just going to hover it, you'll be able to see that this is a lookalike domain, booking.com-word.eu. Now, the hotel representative wants to help the guest to find the lost license or the lost ID, so he's going to click on the URL, and the next step is actually going to log into the management platform of Booking, give away the credential, and then the attacker gets them. Now, this is interesting because this is all over the news. Many hotels over the past year got compromised, and then the Booking accounts were used to deliver phishing to all future guests. Now, what the attackers are going to do, once they have access to all of the Booking.com applications and the platforms, they are just going to send messages to all future guests, to all the guest list, and saying them, listen, your payment has been declined, please enter the credit card details again. Now, whenever you're receiving some notification in Booking.com platform, you're also going to receive an email that comes from Booking with the same link and the message that you received on the platform. Now, as a future guest, you don't want to lose your reservation. You already booked the flights, and you just want to give, again, the credit card details to make sure you're not losing it. So the guest is going to click on this specific link, and is going to land inside of this landing page that looks exactly like the reservation that he has made. The exact same dates of the reservation, the hotel name, the picture, and the exact price. So the only thing that is left for the future guest is just to type in the credit card details, and then the hacker just gets them. So this is a kind of interesting example of how attackers can actually use a compromised user to start with an email and then get outside of it. Now, moving on to a different example of how attackers can start an attack with an email and then move out of it is the callback phishing, also known as phone scams or text scams. So in simple words, it's just by spreading out fake renewal alerts, and you can see all the examples here, what they are doing. They are sending fake invoices, impersonating services like PayPal, Norton, McAfee, and there is no malicious URL inside of it. There is no malicious file. The only malicious thing here is the request to call to the phone number that is presented as part of the email. Now, this is not a generic credit card phishing. Usually, those emails are delivered from addresses like gmail.com, Outlook, and they are kind of easy to spot. But for security vendors, they're only text-based. Sometimes they are coming inside of images or PDF, so it's really hard to determine whether an invoice is legitimate and whether it's not. Now, we called those phone numbers over 10 times, and we always landed in a call center located in India. After calling them and talking for a few minutes, they asked the reservation, the invoice number, and they guided us to go into this URL, which looks like bestbuy.com website. So in this case, they were impersonating Geek Squad, which is the customer support service offered by Best Buy, and we were instructed to go to geeksquadworld.com. Now, after talking to them, they guided us to go to the support tab, and from there, download the TeamViewer. We download TeamViewer, they ask for requests, for request for permission to access our own laptops. And then what we noticed is that they started playing with some registry keys. They started to browse into specific URLs and try to download additional payload. So this is a new way and a new technique to actually deliver malicious payloads to the endpoint without sending it inside of the email, but it actually starts with an email. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the talk, it always starts with an email, always over 90% of the times. Now, let's say you work in the financial department. You are used to work with invoices, and you will see an invoice from Gmail, from Outlook, Yahoo, or Yandex, so you're probably going to say, this is fake, I'm not trusting those invoices. So the interesting thing that attackers started doing is they're actually abusing legitimate services like Intuit or Xero.com, which are used to generate invoices. So they are getting accounts in trusted platforms that are used to generate invoice, and then they're just going to use those platforms to send you those fake invoices with the phone number attached in them. So as a financial employee, you are not really aware of all the cybersecurity risks, and you don't want to pay for this invoice because you are giving a lot of trust in the organization to handle the money of the organization, right? So you're probably going to make the call, and you're going to trust them, and then the whole process is just going to repeat itself, and you will be able to get access to the endpoint of this financial employee. Now, we just want to say and ask you, why does phishing still work those days, right? You all know those phishing campaigns, and you all know those phishing templates. So Igal, can you guide us through the points?
Yeah, so if we ask ourselves why phishing still works these days, we can think about three main reasons. So the first one is system-wise. So attackers can recognize a system, as we showed you before, maybe by the way you browse, maybe your IP, or maybe even your host name. On the detection level, it really depends if the security vendor puts enough resource, maybe into OCR, maybe reputation, maybe brand impersonation. And on the organization level, it also really depends on the employees, if they are educated enough, if they know those threats are actually, going around in their mailboxes. Maybe there's something to do with the company itself. Maybe some password policies need to be applied. Maybe there is password reuse in them. And also maybe some SPF records that needs to be initiated.
So some key takeaways that we want you to take with when you're going back to the office. The first one is make sure we are setting a strong password policy. Make sure you force two-factor authentication on all logins, and make sure to configure SPF records. Now, SPF stands for Standard Policy Framework, and basically it checks the correlation between the IP address of the email and the domain name. So basically what you can do, you can publish public SPF records saying these are all the IP addresses and the subnets that are allowed to send behalf of my domain name. And if there is going to be a mismatch between the published IP addresses and the domain name, the SPF check is going to fail, which can indicate a spoofing attempt to the domain itself. Now, another 3 points that are super important is, of course, conduct phishing trainings to the employees, but this is not enough those days because we have seen so many evasion techniques like the QR codes, the open redirects, so you have to run phishing simulation that try all of those evasion techniques, so make sure you are getting the right vendor, and of course, run some annual penetration testing, make sure to find your weak spots, and make sure you are covering them. Monitor inbox activity, like the logins and the rules that Igal discussed before. Deploy an email security solution. If you haven't so far, you're in a bad situation, so make sure you do it. And of course, embrace new innovative technologies. Always be on the lookout whether a new security vendor is coming out, whether a new solution is coming out, scanning the browsers, for example, browser extension. So there's always something new to learn.
So with that, we want to thank you for sticking with us and listening. There is a LinkedIn QR code leading to our profiles. Scan it if you still trust those. But if not, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thanks for all.